students involved, but we do not possess that technology. So this is a case where it's okay to say, call legal and ask legal if this comes up, because it's a changing landscape with FERPA. I know that the practice, because I talked to Lisa Barnes, Dr. Barnes yesterday, that the practice is that, you know, parents can come in of the students involved and they can view the videotape. So if you're Betty's parent, you're Joan's parent, either one of you can come in and view the videotape. That's the practice that we're currently under. As we get more information, if the laws update and change, we will do our best to make sure you guys get that information. But if you have any doubts, or if you're concerned about a parent, I know there was a situation that came up last year where a parent had been allowed to come in and view a videotape, and they recorded it and then they posted it somewhere. So that's almost like getting a copy. So if you have any concern about that, you can certainly give us a call. We will not turn you away and say, please refer to the recording that Melissa Woods made. We will answer your question, yes.
Yeah. Normally I ask for the documentation of just keeping a record of who's videoed it and the date they did it. Is that needed, or is that over?
A lot of times, don't they have it on there? Is the time and date stamp on there?
I'm talking about the people who see it.
Oh, I think it's always good to, keep a record of that. Yes, absolutely.
I remember at one point, in one of my son's schools, another district in another state, there was a consent form that comes in the packet. I tried to read every little thing that comes that I'm signing, and you have a yes or no consent to tape and video. So how would you make the assumption that the parent, those that may be in that video, did not sign the consent for their kids to be, usually it's taped for something for television or maybe something like that, but if they did not sign the consent for them to be videoed, for them to be taped, and then the parent has a copy of it. Yeah,
we don't have, at least that I have seen, a form like that. And if the video is at school and on school property and students are walking in front of it, the parents can't really not consent to the students being on video because they're in that area.
So it would probably be like classroom taping.
Yeah, probably, yes. And actually we do have like a photo release form, but that is different. Yeah, that is for like if your kid's class is going to go on the news or something and you don't want your kid to be involved. Yeah, absolutely.
What about other kids' video recordings? So fight and the kids are standing videoing with their own personal cell phones.
Yes, I'll get back to that in just a second, but just to review, so parents of any student involved can view it. Other students are considered incidental, and parents of students involved can get a copy if the parents consent. So if Betty and Joan's parents both want a copy, they would both have to say, well, I agree to the other one getting a copy. So, video on student's phone. The most that you can do is ask for it. If you have a student who you know is videotaping an incident on their own personal cell phone, and for some reason the school doesn't have it or doesn't have a copy of that angle, you can only ask the student to get a copy. You can't confiscate the phone or anything. Yes?
Yes, ma'am. So, as I'm reading that correctly, so if there were two students in a fight, as long as the other parent consents, the school can burn videos for each parent and give them to them.
They can. Now, I don't know what our practices are as a district about providing copies, because remember, under FERPA, you only have to allow them to inspect it. So that's probably something that we need to be clear on as a district about whether we're going to be giving copies. Now, it is an educational record, and we give copies of things in the CUME folder, so this probably falls within that practice of if the parent wants a copy and the other one consents, then it's our district practice to make copy of educational records, then they can do that.
Yeah. So when it comes to consent, does it have to be written consent, or can the parent give you some verbal?
It doesn't have to be written. There's no law that says that, but for your protection, I would have it in writing, even if they just send you an email. Okay. Okay, so just a note, Lisa Barnes asked me to keep this in just because there was still some confusion. Apparently, before I came here, video surveillance on the buses used to be encrypted. They're not doing that anymore. You don't have to take a video of the video. You can get an actual copy of the bus video. And there are 4 frames from a bus. So when you get video from a bus, you need to make sure that you request all 4 frames so that you can see all angles. Apparently this was a problem quite a bit before last year. We haven't gotten many calls about it, so we hope that it has cleared up. But just for your information, this is what you want to make sure that you do. Okay, so due process in imposing discipline. Got some weird things going on here. Okay, there it goes. So we want to make sure that every student at your school and in CMS receives the same protections and are entitled to the same treatment. And why is that? Why do they need to be treated the same?
Due process.
Yes, absolutely. Due process. But it is the law, and it protects us. I mean, we have a parent coming in and saying, well, you know, my student slapped your student and your student slapped him back, but my kid got 5 days detention and your kid got in-school suspension. We need to know if there's a reason for that discrepancy, and that the kids are treated equally for the same infractions. Sometimes a kid may have a longer disciplinary history. That may be why they got a greater punishment, but it should be something that an administrator can document and point to if there is different or disparate treatment. So obviously our laws are based on the Constitution, which says that everybody is entitled to life, liberty, and property, and that it shall not be deprived without due process. And that means that there should be no arbitrary, unreasonable, or discriminatory practice by the government. And our school is a local government. The Board of Education is a local government entity. So that includes us. All right, so here's the scenario. After gathering the witness statements, the AP tells the principal about the incident involving Joan and Betty. The principal decides to suspend Joan for 10 days. Principal tells the AP to pull Joan from class and immediately send her home. The AP is concerned because your options. Yes, thoughts?
They're not finished with the investigation.
B. Okay, so what is a 10-day suspension? A short-term suspension. 10 days or less, a short-term suspension. Do we have formal investigations for short-term suspensions? No, we do not have formal investigation for short-term suspensions. So we can eliminate B. A. Exactly. The student was not given the opportunity to have an informal hearing with the principal. So our board policies are very comprehensive in laying out the protections for each level of suspension. A student has due process rights for pretty much all disciplinary actions. Now they vary depending on the severity of the punishment, but even short-term suspension has some due process. So with a short-term suspension, the principal is to meet with the student. They are to give the student the opportunity to give their side of the story, and they are to give the student notice of why it is they're being suspended. That's a due process right. Pulling Joan out of class and saying, you go home for 10 days, that is violating her due process, because even with a short-term suspension, she has some rights. Now, can you appeal a short-term suspension? No, you cannot. There is no appeal of a short-term suspension. And I know that in our current regulation, it talks about that, but apparently that practice was done away with years ago, and the policy is currently, the regulation. The policy is fine, but the regulation is being updated to remove that language. But our practice in the district has been there are no appeals for short-term suspension. Long-term suspensions. Recommendation by the principal to the superintendent. Only the superintendent can impose a long-term suspension. So there's due process there. You can't have a principal or principal designee at a school saying to a student, okay, you're suspended for 20 days or you're suspended for 30 days. That can only be done by the superintendent. The student has a right in some circumstances to a DTM. They also have a right to a due process of a long-term suspension, and that can be appealed to the board. So that they have due process hearing, which I know we have a hearing officer. And so these are the rights that they have. Same with the expulsion rights. They have a right to, that can only be done by the board. The superintendent cannot just say to a student, you're expelled from CMS school systems. No, that has to be done by the board. So depending on what level or what stage you are in the disciplinary process, your rights will change, but you still have rights. And that includes also notice to the parent. It includes the timeliness of that. So due process is going to be different at different stages, but we want to make sure that all students have that. And I think that's in connection with what Cindy was talking about with an MDR. You know, if you have a student who has a disability, that's one of their due process rights, that they are to have an MDR anytime their suspensions go beyond 10 days. So you have to make sure that those rights are protected. So the minimum due process rights that we have for all suspensions, out of school suspension,